Hello and welcome. My name is Carron Little, and I'm the organizer of Out of Sight Chicago. And today I'm in conversation with Helen Lee about her public performance practice. Out of Sight is situated on the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Adwa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations. Out of Sight as an organization is very particularly interested in having conversations around race, gender, class, ability, differently abled abilities, and ableism and colonial and imperialism dialogues as it relates to culture. In today's conversation with Helen, we are going to be talking about the systemic violence that has been happening towards Black and Asian communities in America. And to introduce, Helen Lee was born and raised in Chicago to immigrant parents from South Korea. She received her MFA with a focus in performance and film from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2019, and a BA in dance with a minor in theatre from the University of Hawaii in Manoa in 2003. Helen creates performances and visual artworks that weave movement, storytelling, film, video, taxidermy, installation, and social practice. Their previous works investigated various ways to enhance and diminish the senses. Those sensorial explorations have led them on a journey to examine facets of identity, shame, trauma, healing, death, grief, and fear. She has had the privilege of presenting works in the US, South Korea, Japan, Germany, Iceland, Finland, and Canada. She was awarded SAIC's Graduate Dean Professional Development Award to attend the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics Convergence, hosted by York University, and was Chicago Moving Dance Company's D49 awardee and affiliate artist for Dance Shelter. Her performances have been published in Emergency Index by Ugly Duckling Press, and films have been presented by Chicago Park District's Chicago On Screen. Their hope is that the work Helen creates can help amplify the voices of Asian American women, making their narratives more visible while building authentic and meaningful connections and accessibility in all communities. Currently, Helen is a 2021-2022 Hatch Artist in Resident with Chicago Artist Coalition, where she is currently located. So hello, Helen. How are you today?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I'm going to start by sharing a compilation video of previous works and Helen's more recent performance called Weaving Cocoons, Colliding Monarchs, which she did for Out of Sight for the public performance program this summer. Do you have any quick thoughts you wish to share, or shall we dive in straight to it?
No, let's just dive in. I hope you enjoy.
Okay.
Song that my mother used to draw and sing for me. It's raining furiously. In the morning time, doom. in the afternoon doom. Daytime doom. Oh my goodness, it's so scary. It's a skeleton's head. I remembered I had $51 in my piggy bank, so I thought I can give up $1 and maybe I can convince someone to tell me. So I was able to do this, and the boy followed me home. And when I gave him the $1, he said, "Oh, my father says that we shouldn't play with you anymore because you're a girl." And it confused me because I knew there were other girls in the neighborhood that also played basketball, and so I said this. And then he continued to say, "Oh, well, also because my father says we can't play with you because you're Korean." Marks we make that cannot be undone, the many questions we have that are often unanswered.
Hello, and it's always a beautiful memory to go back to those performances that we shared live this summer. And Isa, who's in the chat here with us, also watched them live from Spain. So thank you for joining us again today. Isa, Helen, I know I'm like communicating to multiple people. I wanted to start by asking you about, thinking about the early explorations of your performances that were shared in the first video, and how you created unexpected. I was intrigued to find out in our conversation over the last few days that you started by creating unexpected encounters in public spaces, although you have a dance background. And I'm intrigued how this engagement with sight has developed the process of how you make work over time.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up training as a dancer, but I've soon realized as I started to do that out of high school, performances are set on a stage. But I feel like, the movement or whatever is happening is always carried with me on a day-to-day basis. So I started thinking about how can we bring these performances outside of the stage, in everyday occurrences, like in parks or lighthouses or gardens. So I think I started there, and I really wanted, passerbys to have that experience of something unexpected, because there are unexpectancies that happen in our life, and how do we, resolve that? How do we, handle that? So yeah, I wanted to bring those performances to spaces where audiences could stay the whole duration. They could visit for a little bit, or take the journey with us. And most of the times I've tried to create some sort of traveling journey where the audience will watch a little bit, like say at Lakeshore Drive, where the big green fields, and then we will start to move, and then the audience can follow, crossing a bike path, down some stairs, and then end up in the water. Not them, me and the performers end up in the water. Yeah.
So, and thinking about the important subject matter that you created in the work this summer for the parks, you're doing the work with a lot of respect and care. And I think this is when we're thinking about sight and context, how we work in one of my words that I was thinking about when I was thinking about your work was interrelational, and so can you talk about, is there I'm often thinking about ecologies of care. How can we switch the dynamics of these public spaces? Can you talk about how you're thinking about that in a social context?
I don't know that I'm like thinking about it in the forefront initially in my practice and process. It started off as an internal exploration of the senses. In live performances, you get sight and sound, obviously. And I started exploring the sense of smell with opening up, ripping up different types of fruit, mostly grapefruit. And then that smell would be emitted. And then the sense of touch, releasing 10,000 ladybugs into the air. And maybe one would land on you with this little subtle sense of touch. And then playing with taking away senses and enhancing senses by asking audience members to close their eyes, to have a hand on their back, walk, maybe run, and we'd be guiding them. well, it takes a lot of trust, you know, between us as performers and the audience members, because most of the time, you know, they don't have it, you know, body movement experience is like training, but we all have movement experience as far as like we walk, we sit, we stand, we stretch, right? So it was first an exploration of that starting back in 2007. Then I started looking at my family and my ancestral lineage and a lot of personal stories that happen, especially with me sitting between two worlds. My family is from Korea, and I was born and raised here. And just growing up in the city, looking the way I do, and then finding acceptance in that. And I think going to Hawaii really, really helped me be more confident in my voice, stand in myself, and really start to accept the way I look, accept where my family is from. And then these are things, the social aspect, like political aspects, are things I've always cared about, but I didn't know how to put that into my work. So it was a very slow process. And so only in the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been able to bring that more into my work. So it's been a really long, slow process from the inside of senses, then family, then outwardly. So yeah, I'm still in this process of trying to figure out like what that means to me, and how to articulate those thoughts. But I just know that it's important that I want to start talking about those things and sharing those things in my work, because, you know, oftentimes, you know, subjects of killings, racism, xenophobia are things that we all know about, but we're not going to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. And so for me right now, it's important to at least talk about it and not keep it a secret. And that will, I hope, get people to start thinking about it. And right now is a really significant time for our world, where these issues of Black killings and Asian killings are more in the forefront. They're being more highlighted. They've always been there. So yeah, that's sort of like a trajectory, a kind of through line of where my mind's been at.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that kind of evolution of the development of your scores has actually come out of your conversation with sites, you know, and whether that has been a interrelational conversation that you've had over many years that has been part of the process of the development.
Yes, I'm definitely looking at the location I'm at. For example, that last location at Garfield Park was a bridge, you know, and of all the parks we have done, you know, that was the first kind of bridge. And so a bridge, I feel like, has so much beautiful symbolism, you know, and particularly for this piece, you know, the cycle of life and death, and that bridge from your living life, crossing that bridge over to an extended maybe rebirth or this other life, or yeah, from darkness to light, light transforming back to darkness and back again. But yeah, that bridge was such a beautiful symbol. And then there was this like water underneath as well. So I'm definitely thinking about the site. When I graduated from SAIC, I made these 3 residencies for myself: Iceland, Germany, and Japan. And each of those 3 sites was a different building before. So for example, Iceland was a fish factory. Germany was a train station. And Japan, I thought it was an old bathhouse. So I was thinking of rejuvenation and cleansing, but actually it was an old women's hospital. So that was quite interesting, because I ended up being in Japan during the pandemic, right when it was hitting, like around March. Yeah, and so Iceland, at the fish factory, I was really looking at the cycle of life and death and working on a lot of taxidermy at that point. Train stations, I mean, that's the stopping point, the commute in between, the spaces in between. And so that was a really beautiful space to kind of like pause. And that space was in between Iceland and Japan as well. And so really looking at those histories of the buildings, because we each carry our histories, our memories. How do we look back at those histories? How do we honor those? How do we move forward? Yeah, and I think there's so much memory that's in our bodies, trauma, stresses, joys, that often we don't like to sift through. I think we have to sit still with them for quite a long time to come to some kind of resolution, which is, for me, seems to be acceptance of those things, acceptance of the histories. And then how do you start bringing that information to people? How do you start sharing that? Yeah, because I think information is the most important thing. And then how do you, learn from that? Essentially, we're all learning every day. So,
Yeah, I think this might be a good segue, actually, thinking about, the personal narratives that are involved in your work. Maybe this is a great segue to go and share us the exhibition that you have next door,
okay.
because this really kind of situates what you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Gonna go on a little journey now.
Okay. All right.
And
All right. So
we love the travel. We love these in-between spaces.
So when you walk in the door, this is the exhibition. And so you walk in there. I found this desk, which has got this, let's see, compartments. There we go. And in these different compartments are bones and teeth and butterfly wings and pins, milkweeds, and photos of my family that my dad actually took. This is an envelope that my dad actually sent to Korea when I was a little girl. I think it was 1982 or 1986. I can't remember, that he sent. And then I was able to retrieve that 4 years ago. This little scroll that says, "Every day we live, we move closer to death." Basically, this piece is called Specimen Study. And so this is a kind of a desk where you're kind of studying specimens, seashells, crystals, animals, insects, but also then family and history. And and then let's see. I've got these 5 self-portraits with poisonous and non-poisonous plants in front of my face. And let's see. This is, most of these photos are taken by my father. And this is my sister and I with my mom at our grocery store that we actually had in Lincoln Square. It was very near to Montrose and Western. So this is his story of immigrating to Chicago from Korea. Let's see. And we've got, you can see yourself there. This really lovely cabinet that has all the 18 Black and Asian lives that I have been looking up their stories. I've just had their names listed here. And I tried to, for example, Maggie Long she was burned in her home. So I burned a little piece of paper and then kind of overlaid it along with her name to give it a little, to put my hand in a little personal touch. E. Lee and Teresa Hakyeon Cha, they were raped. And so I've got some cuts on the paper. It's very hard to see here. And then Marcellus, he was actually killed the same day my cousin committed suicide. So there's little pins, there it is, pins connecting to that, October 2020, which just passed the 1-year anniversary. There's a QR code here to scan that and to read about each of these stories on my website. And let's see. This is pictures of my family again. And then the story that has to do with, you saw in the little beginning clip of me giving that dollar to learn about that secret. And then the lands all the way over here, connected to another story. So when the viewer is watching or looking at this, they're reading it, and then they have to bend down to look and see what's on the floor there. Let's see. Butterfly breakfast bowl. And so this is really inspired from Murray Oppenheim, the fur saucer and cup. And so butterfly wings and a butterfly spoon with milkweed on there. And this is my cousin Julie's jewelry box. And so I kind of here as a little memorial of her, and a Band-Aid. And then around the Band-Aid in Korean, it says apuda, which means it hurts. That's a photo of my cousin and I. And this is a letter that I wrote to her. And I was writing it before the 1-year anniversary, but I dated it on the 1-year anniversary. I think that might be it for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this, you're really, you're bringing to light these, deeply personal narratives, and tragic stories, tragic experiences. And how are you thinking about, when you're developing a score for a performance, how are you thinking about embodied practices and the symbolism of materials for it, as you're working in connection together, in the score of a performance? How do you kind of develop that? Is it a very intuitive process, or does it come out through a research practice?
It's mostly intuitive, and I just started doing like some research, and I do some research a little bit here and there as well. Like, I started doing some research on the LA riots back in 1989, and a little bit of reading on the relationship between Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama and their allyship. But most of it is intuitive. So right now I feel like, especially with the pandemic, that we are in this like mammoth cocoon. And I started to think about how will we transform? How are we individually in this big cocoon going to transform from this? And so obviously I started thinking about transformation and butterflies. First I was thinking about different sorts of butterflies, but my recent focus has been on monarch butterflies, because they are one of the butterflies that live the longest. And then they migrate. This is one of the most important things for me, was that they migrate from Mexico to Canada, and then Canada back to Mexico. So there's this whole cycle that happens. And I suppose thinking about the cycle of life and death, and also the migration of my family to Chicago. And then war. So butterflies, cocoons, and war, specifically for this last piece that we did with Out of Sight. And wars, like literal wars between two countries or two sets of people, or, culturally, or races, but also the wars that we fight and struggle with on a daily basis or yearly basis, or, during a certain, in a decade, how we struggle with those internal wars. And then I try to bring that and try to translate that into performance or objects. And that's a tricky part. How do you put those feelings and those things into those things? And so that's what I try to play with.
Yeah, and just kind of watching the videos over the last week and thinking about performances that I've seen of yours in real life. There is this constant taking apart and mending. It's this kind of, things are separated and then things are patched back together in a fragile state, and there is this constant sense of fragility, but in and this kind of this courage that it takes to go through, to actually mend, to heal. That takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of space to be strong, to facilitate that process. And one thing that I'm really interested in terms of out of sight, is how do we employ or utilize public performance practices to contribute and be part of the healing process in Chicago, in a city that has been impacted by decades of systemic violence. How can public performance shift the dynamic of these sites where violence, and trauma, deep trauma, has taken place? And Mark Barmuti Joseph talks about the environmental pollution that is subjected towards communities in the States, in terms of race and in terms of class. And today I just read an article about how 200 million Americans are being polluted by chemicals, by forever chemicals. 200 million. And it says that an estimated number of Americans whose drinking water maybe contain worrying levels of forever chemicals. And we know in Chicago we have a high rate of lead poisoning. And one of the impacts of lead poisoning is violence and aggression. And, why isn't there, and so, how are you using your performance practice to, and I was quite interested in the portraits that you did at the Women's Hospital in Japan, because there you're dealing with these like invisible, toxins, but I think also in the performances that you did this summer, you're using material to really kind of think about how you can expose the invisible pollutants that are impacting our lives. Can you talk about how you're seeing that as a transformative process for the public?
Yeah, I think that I had a thought and then it kind of just ran out of my mind. So I'm like, oh, sorry. Where are you? Where are you?
Sorry, I know I'm going through,
No, that's okay. Well, let's see. I'm trying to fish back what you said, in the very beginnings of our exchange. And okay.
Thinking about environmental, how is trauma part of our is an environmental
okay pollutant? I got it now. I think I remember. Okay, so yeah, I talked about we have these living histories, these living traumas, and I touched briefly on really sitting with those feelings. And oftentimes we have a fear of sitting with ourselves. And so that's why I think we often distract ourselves, busy ourselves, go, go, go. I have to run from place to place to place. And then there's a healing process that happens when you are able to sit with yourself. And the sitting with ourselves is not super fun, because there is a lot of revisiting. And so when we visit, say, we're on the go and there happens to be a place that you passed, that you saw a performance, that was activated, you may have that memory resurface again. And so then you might say something to someone or, share that bit of information with someone. I think that's sort of how it ripples out. But as you're sitting with that and going through all of that sort of darkness, there is a light at the end of all of that. And then there's a cycle that happens. It's not like once you've done that once, it's like you're done and over with it. No, there's going to be like phases and phases of that. Just like with the systemic history of racism and violence and so many other things. But specifically when we're speaking about racism, I mean, it's going back so long and so deep. I mean, like, I really hate to say this, but racism is it's never going to go away. I really hate to say that. What I feel like is going to happen is an evolution and a more awareness that's going to continue to happen as years go by, as time passes, and then hopefully, I have this really beautiful meditation teacher, Jan Chosen Bays. And she says, the most we could do, or one of the most important things we can do is when we pass, the ways that we leave things behind is how we've loved, how we've shared, how we've taught people and learned. And then that we leave that behind. And then hopefully that will be this kind of hope for the future. So I really do believe that, but it's a slow process, given the long history. And then it's a cyclical kind of cycle that happens. I think oftentimes we're very like, we got to go upward, but it's never really like that. It's like this and it's like this, so I think understanding that, and I know that people get so like riled up and angry, and yes, it's definitely something that is angering, but I think when we're able to look at that anger, that hurt, that pain, sit with it, then we can kind of move out of that. And then for the performances, like we're on the run, I think activating those spaces are so important, like the daily, everyday life, like going to the park, and people there's so many beautiful parks in Chicago. And when you are walking through that, it's time for contemplation. It's a time to connect to nature, which is so important, to be able to connect to inner landscape. And once you're able to do that, then be able to connect to the outer landscape. How do you navigate that? Especially important in relationships. And I feel like it's when we're activating these spaces, there's a ripple effect that happens, kind of a memory. And so hopefully, because memory is with us all the time, history is with us all the time. So I think that's why it's really important to have that activation with public spaces and share that.
Yeah, can you share? There was, and Martina's made a really important point. This transmission, and I'm often thinking about the aura that is transmitted, into a site after a performance. Specifically talking about the performance that you did on the bridge in Garfield Park. And I'd really love to hear, there was a very deep conversation that happened post the performance with the public that witnessed that and participated. Can you share what that, are there parts of that dialogue that you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, I'm going to just go back into the other room because I've been like squatting by that desk.
Indeed, move around. That's back to the desk. We always need to move.
Yeah, there was this really lovely conversation that happened after that last performance of the whole August series. Yeah, I mean, mostly I think, people said that hearing the stories of the Black and Asian lives that have been taken, I think it kind of be a little bit like a taken aback, but I think they also just shared that it was important. And yeah, one person said that the milkweeds that we were holding, or I was holding, that those were kind of blowing into the air and then landing in the water and drifting away, and being the symbolism for these lives. And when we hear some of these stories, a lot of that, the trauma of the story kind of sits in our bodies, or for me it does, and I think for a lot of us. And it's like, and so she said, rather than feeling like that, it was like in the milkweeds and then drifting away to plant something else. Mostly people were really, I think, appreciative and said thank you. Yeah, and for past performances, not specifically this one, maybe it has, but I've had people say like, oh, I was a little uncomfortable at first. I didn't really know what to make of it, or I'm not sure if I liked it, but it's been sitting with me. I've been thinking about it. So now I have a different respect for it, or appreciation, or a different viewpoint. And I think that is so important. Like maybe at first you're like, ugh, I don't know, that was like a weird. I teach yoga and meditation. That sometimes happens in my classes as well. They say that, and then later on they're like, well, actually, slowing it down was really, really nice, or something like that. And I really try to carry those aspects into the performance, and hopefully that person is also carrying that with them as well. Yeah.
It's interesting actually that you talk about this circular,
Yes.
cycle, and how we move through light and dark, and how, being with grief is a process, and it is a cyclical process that we go in and out of throughout our lives, especially when for those of us who've lost our parents, or people very close to us, like your cousin, for instance. That is, and when we were curating the performances this summer, the conversation that Martine Vial, Ika Trinks, Jeremy Powley, and myself had was this idea of, creating a circular movement through the parks. And, when I had a better idea of the score of the work that you were creating, I also decided, let's move the public from your piece to one of us, so they can have this embodied experience of releasing, because, living through Trump in America, and all of the police killings that we, throughout the pandemic, it was yet another trauma that sat in my body personally. And, the only thing I know how to do now, is use movement to kind of work and be able to articulate, to get rid of the trauma,
Yes.
or to move it. But this, Isa makes this really important comment in the chat today. She asks, I was wondering how you manage your own feelings when performing in things that are difficult and hard to talk about.
Oh, that's a really good question. I want to just touch briefly on something you just said, and then I want to answer that question. So when we're in a proscenium theater, we are sitting there. Whatever information is coming, whether it's traumatic or joyful, we're sitting with that. And I think the reason why I wanted to move out of that and have people travel was so that like you said, you need to move. And so that the person walking through the park, through that journey, or the lighthouse is having that kind of embodied experience as a participant as well. So yeah, I think that's so important. Okay, how do I deal with my own? Okay, so I think have been since 2007 playing with the senses. And for me, I've been doing a lot of meditation work and sensory work and mindfulness work on my own. And I've been teaching yoga for almost 15 years now. So that is what really helps to keep me grounded. I do love to do this chakra meditation, and that really helps with these little mantras. I am, I feel, I will, I love, I speak, I listen, I see, I understand. So I do this like almost every day, and that helps me. The mindfulness practices is from my teacher, Jan Chosen Bays, from this book called How to Train a Wild Elephant, Other Adventures in Mindfulness. And there are 53 chapters and exercise for every week of the year. And then I do a lot of, once a year I haven't for the past year because of the pandemic, but I try to go to her monastery, which is outside of Portland, and do a session, which is basically a silent retreat. I tried Vipassana, and Vipassana is like hardcore. I respect it, but it's really hardcore because no talking, no reading, no writing. Okay, fine. But in Vipassana, there is, no movement, just the standing, sitting, lying down, a little walking. But in sesshin, at Chosen's monastery, every month is a different theme. So grasses, trees, and the great earth, and you meditate outside, and she gives us exercises like watch the flowers and meditate with your eyes, slowly focus and just watch the flower, or watch the sky, watch the branches, not all of them. And I think that really helps to bring that into my daily life. When I'm walking, I look up. When I'm on the train, sometimes I love listening to music and podcasts when I'm on the train, but sometimes I'll take them off and just look out the window and look at the sky and see what happens there, or just look at people. It's basically an observation. And so it's taken me a long time to figure that out for the performance process, like staying with it. And also just recognizing it's important to share them and to do it. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think, I learnt quite early on from one of my art professors about and reading the abject, and once I understood the philosophy of the abject, it gave me a survival kit in a way to approach life. That when you work through the horror, you can reach enlightenment. But that takes work. And as you said, sitting with it, transforming it through the body, through embodied practices, and, meditation and silence really, helps facilitate that process. And it is a personal journey for each person. These different techniques, cure are part of that. I want to make sure there's lots of amazing comments in the chat, and we've got for about 5 minutes. Do you feel that people reflect? Sharing mindfulness with art. Yes, when you spoke about being in public space, and I'm quite, I'm kind of really obsessed with this. And yesterday I was in a conversation where they were, sharing spectacles, and that was seen as public performance. And, obviously, and also kind of these public performance events that were ticketed. And I have a theory about, you know, how that changes a public performance. But, you know, I'm intrigued to know what your thoughts are about the unexpected encounter. And you talked about how this impacts the public's experience.
Yeah.
And maybe if you could share an example of somebody who had
Okay, well, I've never, yeah, I think that, you know, the public spaces, like the parks and lighthouses and gardens that I've been a part of, they're just open to the public. And I think that that is important for me, I think, because there isn't a price to, like, you know, go to the park or go to the lighthouse, you know? And so I feel like it should just be a part of the everyday experience, even though, of course, it's not every day that we're going to go to the park or a garden and then we're going to experience some sort of performance or some kind of encounter or journey, you know? But, you know, I really do believe that from the time we're born till the time we pass, because we will all die, that there is this whole journey that happens. And some of those journeys, I think, are important to have as just an everyday sort of thing. Yeah, I don't know how to articulate myself right now, but yeah, I think it would change the experience if you had a ticket. And like, how do you ticket something like that? You know, how do you sell like tickets for something like that? So I mean, for me, it's really important that it's just accessible to everybody, like no matter what. And it also brings in a whole different community when you are ticketing for a theater performance, proscenium performance, Black Lab performance. And I think those are wonderful too. It's different, just a little bit of different way to experience something, different way to experience yourself and other people. Yeah, and I think that that's a beautiful thing, you know, to bring that insight to the outside, inside here to the outside, and inside in the space to the outdoors, you know. So yeah, I look at a lot of those parallels a lot as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially kind of thinking about these interstitial, like these transitory spaces, and making the connection between the two. I often, you know, I find quite, you know, a constant symbol within your work. So we've got to the end of today's conversation, and I just want to announce that next week we will be in conversation with Kathy Schwalbe at the same time, 11:15, and this on October the 30th. And then I also want to highlight that yesterday we collaborated with the Spark Research Center in conversations about artistic research in public space. And those conversations will be documented on the Spark website. And also on the Out of Sight Twitch channel is the performances that occurred last night. So I do hope you can tune in and participate and listen to those. They were performances by Dimple B. Shah, who's also part of the Out of Sight collective community, and Lo Bill and Vanessa Dion Fletcher, who's performed with Out of Sight since 2014, and Nicola Fornoni. And I was also invited to do a performance at the beginning of the program. So do hope you can tune in and watch those. They'll be live on the Out of Sight Twitch channel for the next 2 weeks. And Helen, do you have some upcoming events? Would you like to share
Yeah, so
about that?
the exhibition here at Chicago Artists Coalition closes November 11th. And then on November 10th at 6 o'clock, Nat Piper, the other artist that I'm sharing this exhibition with, they and I will have a performance here. And then I am have a residency at Links Hall currently, the commission residency. And that works in progress showing will be December 17th at 7 p.m. And then I also have a Roots and Culture exhibition. I think that's November, I forget the date, November 19th, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, it's the 19th to December 18th in the
Yes.
window at Roots and Culture, which
Yes.
is on Milwaukee Avenue. So, yes, I'm definitely looking forward to the performance on November the 10th at Chicago Artists Coalition. And I think you need special tickets to the In the Works performance at Links Hall on December 17th. But Helen is in residency at Links Hall, and there will be a finale showing perhaps in the spring.
In June of
In
2022.
Yes, yes. So we look forward to that. And thank you again to Isa and Martine and everybody who's tuned in and participated in the conversation today. Next week is the last Artist Focus with Kathy Schwalbe on October 30th. So do hope you can join us then and have a lovely rest of your week. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.